Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel, and my guest today is Richard Swatton. Hello, Richard.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Today we are having a discussion that's a little bit different because it's not about your work, but it is about this wonderful book by Liz Greene called Barriers and Boundaries. And there you have a different copy.
Yes.
So your copy looks very different. Why is that?
Well, this copy was, this in fact was volume one of the Center for Psychological Astrology series, which Liz opened in the very early 1990s. And so this lecture was given in October of 1994, where the center, I believed, had moved to Regent's College at that time. Whereas in my time, it was in Finchley, Northern Finchley, and so at that point she hadn't opened the series. But 2 years later, the first book got published in 1996, and it was called Barriers and Boundaries. And she'd done a couple of seminars on defense mechanisms, because I think what had happened was that she'd done a 3-year course. She designed a lot of it with Howard. She'd had a lot of different astrologers come in after about the first year or two. She made it into a 3-year course where you had to have therapy, and there were all kinds of teachers, and there were counseling classes outside. Every year we had to have about 12 different 12 different kind of people introducing us to different kinds of therapies. So I got to do, Gestalt therapy and psychiatry and so on. And this were all people that Liz Greene knew. And then we had our supervision groups, of course. But up until that time on the curriculum, the defenses of the human personality had not been put on her course. It was something that I think was a little amiss, and so she decided to add that in, if you like, which was a later edition, because of course the seminars started to open in about 1983, 84. She met Howard. She was giving lectures already. She had passed her various astrological exams for the faculty and various bits and pieces. I think she'd retrained then. Liz Greene, I think she went through the psychosynthesis course with Ian Gordon Brown and all that, and then she went on to become a Jungian analyst with the Association of Jungian Analysts in NW3, which is where she used to live in those days, in a place called Estelle Road. Look at that, woman of the stars, Estelle Road. Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't a coincidence that she chose her address there. This was all back in the 80s, of course, just to give you a bit of background.
And tell us about your involvement with all of this.
Well, it's a long story, but let's cut it down because we want to get onto the book. I'd been studying astrology since about 1977, 78, and and all kinds of astrology. Alan Leo, Margaret Hone, Vivian Robson, Zadkiel, Raphael. They all like to give their names, kind of exalted, angelic names, largely because they didn't want their real names known at that time, because astrology in the 1800s, late 1800s, was rather. And then Alan Leo created the Astrological Society and so on, as we know. But I was taught all of that and theosophical astrology from there. I met a teacher in 1978 who knew Carter. Anyway, he was all involved in that, and I learned off him. And then I was introduced to American astrology through Grant Louis and Noel Till, and to some degree Dave Dane Rudger, who was more philosophical. I couldn't understand him at the time, but now I greatly appreciate Dane Rudger and how much Liz Greene was influenced by Dane Rudger, in fact. Anyway, when I came to London after music college, 1979 to 1982, I was in Trinity College studying music and composition. And then after that, I continued my astrological studies. I learned horary at that time, was interested in it. And you got to remember at that time, there was nothing much on the shelves. You know, Watkins bookshop at that time was a small sliver. You went in the front door and you couldn't fit two in the aisle. And there was just one aisle. Now look at it. And I think it was partly due to the Zeitgeist of the time that the new age was coming in, crystal technology, meditation, all kinds of things were coming in. And Liz Greene and her school, the Center for Psychological Astrology, was one of those. Howard Susportus, who was her partner at the time, had spent at least 10 years with Osho, Sri Raghavan Rajneesh, on, you know, and he was a kind of meditator, new age. And interestingly enough, him and Liz Greene had both studied or both come across Isabel Hickey in the United States. Now, Isabel Hickey is famous from, you know, pioneer to poet, and she was a teacher over there. Anyway, a lot of background maybe you don't know, you don't want to know. But I came, then I started to read, and books started to come out. I hadn't read Liz Greene's A New Look at an Old Devil on Saturn, and so on. Anyway, I came across her book, Astrology of Fate, in 1984. And I knew it was a difficult read for me at the time, but there was an odd coincidence, which I may have told you before, that I was reading this book, and I was a pianist to accompany some jazz singers down in Richmond College at the time. And anyway, I was reading this book, and I came back one night from there, late one night, about 11 o'clock, and I sat on a train, and I sat next to this lady who was partially blind, and she was a therapist and a music therapist, and we started talking. And I was reading this book called The Astrology of Fate. Anyway, turned out that she was at my station, Clapham Common. And this is very relevant, by the way. She was at my station. I said, would you like me to help you through the tubes? And she said, yes. She gave me a card. Her name was Frankie Armstrong. I think she's died now, died quite a while ago. Anyway, when I was finishing this book, the case study at the back of the book of The Astrology of Fate was a name called Alison, and it was her. It was the same person that I'd met on the train whilst reading the book. And I told her I was reading this book, thinking of going on Liz Greene's course next year. She didn't say anything on that train. And this is called The Astrology of Fate. So that sealed it for me. When I realized I'd met that by this weird coincidence, I then signed on Liz Greene's course for 3 years. And I think it was a Swiss cottage, and then I think we went up to a different college. And I studied at the Center for Psychological Astrology from 1985 to 1988. And I produced my thesis in 94. And there's just one little bit that I want to say. Here's my thesis. The Psychology and Astrology of Defenses and Anxiety. This was given to Liz, the school, the center, in 94, in August 94, and strangely, in October of 94, we get the first lesson, we get the first course in defenses and anxiety. So I think that my thesis had an effect, that she realized that there was something missing. She never say this, of course, but I'm presuming, because in here I'm noting the defenses of the planets and the signs and the responses of the signs. And then, of course, in her own inimitable, brilliant way, I think she took that theme and realized that she had something missing on the course. So she did it, and I think the book is brilliant as far as it goes in her analytic knowledge. And that's my involvement, I believe, in this book, and also at the Center for Psychological Astrology. Sorry, that was a long tale, but I needed to give you the background to me and what I know about the center.
Well, it's those synchronicities that we think of that are just absolute magic. Um, how you would meet the person who was the case study for the very book that you are reading. It's just, it's the kind of stuff that makes you sit up and pay attention.
That's right. That's right. And,
And
and likewise, I didn't think that the appearance 3 months later of a lecture on defense mechanisms using astrology was coincidence. I think my particular take on it was some kind of uh, uh, I think she realized, as I say, this is an excellent way in which to then develop signs, aspects, planets, and things like that, because she was a Jungian analyst at the time and knew a lot about all of that stuff. Always a very well-read, depth-read person, and she still is, of course.
tell us then about just what defense mechanisms are for people who are unfamiliar with this concept. What are they?
Well, I'm a psychotherapist and have been since '94 as well, which is quite interesting. And I was so taken by Liz and Howard that this changed my career. I was a musician at the time, and I decided in '94 that I wanted to become a therapist because I was always interested in psychology and astrology. So the center had an effect in terms of wanting me to study this more deeply and become involved in these matters of healing. Um, Defense mechanisms really stem from Freudian psychology, but they're also been known as defenses against instinct. So she covers that briefly in the first introduction, that everybody has natural defenses about the environment and so on. Instinct, like flight. The flight defense is open to us all. We see something we don't like, we fly away from it. We run. But then there's also the fight. If we have to fight in a certain circumstances, we'll turn around and we'll face our enemy. And that is a defense against, you see, forces that threaten survival. There are also other defenses, such as surrender or submission to it, which is the Patty Hearst defense. Patty Hearst, do you remember, was abducted, and she was going to be killed by her abductors because she was a millionaire. Her father was a millionaire or billionaire, something. And her defense was to completely be subsumed by the ethos of the group that she belonged to. And she was so convincing in it, she became part of the group and they didn't kill her. So there is also a submissive defense, but these are instinctual rather than the defenses given by Freud in psychoanalytic theory and developed from that time on. Defenses against the things which threaten the ego or threaten the person. And the ego could be, there are three basic types of forces there, where the ego may defend against feelings of being put down, pride, inner feelings that they are of a religious nature or a moral nature. These are inner defenses where one feels conscience. Do you see what I mean? And then there are the natural ones of projection, where we project out our fears onto something like phobias. We have a fear of heights, we have a fear of this, we have a fear of spiders. These are quite natural and instinctual, but it's incredible how different people use defenses, and that some are more, let's say, innately triggered or disposed towards some than others. And then we bring in the astrology. Because
Yes.
if you have a Sun Saturn and you feel that life has been put some dampener upon your life force, some external authority, there's only two ways you can do that. You can submit to it and forever feel unconfident against all authority figures or rules or against what Saturn demands of us, or you can become Saturn. You can develop a kind of personality which is sometimes overly rigid, over controlling, and you get into obsessive defenses, not being wrong, a defended ego, a wall against things. And so you can see how astrology can so easily fit into these concepts of psychological reaction, yes, particularly in the realm of defenses. So the personality puts on various defenses in order to protect itself quite legitimately against those forces which would bring it down or threaten it. And it's a very complicated area of psychoanalysis.
It is, but it is extremely important. I think it's key to understanding a good deal of behavior that otherwise seems baffling. When I have clients come to me with phobias,
Yeah.
so often the moment they realize the symbol, what that actually represents as a fear, disappears. I can think of a client who was afraid of being on trains.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to do any hypnosis with this. I just had to listen to her.
Yeah.
And she had been talking about how she felt when she was on a train. And then she talked about how she felt about her life. And the language was exactly the same.
Yes.
When I asked her whether she'd noticed that, it was like it was the big light bulb moment. And that was the beginning. She had to take trains for a new job that she had just received. She hadn't been able to even think about this,
Yeah.
because of the claustrophobia being so strong. Next day, she messaged me and she said, "I was on the train today. I was fine."
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be that simple, making that link, and it just goes. Of course, then we had other work to do,
Yeah.
so that she could free herself within her life. So, but it was just that recognition that her subconscious was trying to tell her something really important.
Well, that is whether you're a psychoanalyst or whatever type of therapist you are, that is the light bulb moment when, in Freudian terminology, you realize you're projecting an unconscious fear onto an external object or place or thing, whether it's lifts or trains or planes. There is something about that in which Karen Horney called it externalization, where you have an internal fear, but it's unconscious to you. You are unaware what the real source is. And then it gets projected onto an external situation. Now, claustrophobia is classic with Uranus, Sagittarius, Jupiter, those kind of things which want to be liberated and not enclosed in a set rule. So claustrophobia is often connected to Saturn and Jupiter or Uranus. Those kind of things are around in the horoscope. A fear of being enclosed or blocked in some way. Pluto are often involved with, spider phobias or snake phobias, these kind of darker elements that symbolize the darker elements of the limbic system, the fear of predators and all of that, So astrology affords us a rich symbolism, which is particularized in any individual, but any part of the chart can be projected.
Yes, of course. It's inevitable that there are going to be things that we're not seeing, which of course the chart is showing what we can't see.
Yeah.
looking at the book, what do you feel the is there a part that you feel really stands out for you?
For me, yeah, well, a lot of it stands out. I think the great exploration of the elements and the signs affords Liz a kind of springboard from which to then add on a lot about what the signs mean, about their motivational forces, and how they can be used as defenses. You know, the Taurian need to conserve, to be rigid, to block anything. You know, as I say in some of my talks, Taurus usually says no before anything else. You know, would you mind me loaning some money? No. Or yes, if you see what I mean. It's because there is a sense in the Taurian prescription that you need to depend on something solid. And you can depend on something solid by owning things. If you own this, these are mine. You see, so there is a set of characteristics around the sign, let's say, just choosing one, which is very cautious, which is very dependable, and does not go around risking too much, you see. So the defenses around rigidity, what Freud called anal defenses, controlling, holding on, preserving, conserving, we get an idea, you see, around that. But then Liz talks a lot about, when she goes through all the signs, and I think it's a marvelous trail through the signs and the elements, and you get a rich rich travelogue right the way through all of them, and to get to the heart of them. You know, the water requires is looking for fusion with others. Do you see what I mean? And so there is this sense of wanting to lose oneself in an emotional atmosphere, what I would call actually more related to hysterical defenses, where emotions overwhelm things and they become so emotionally aroused. But when you're doing that, you're not thinking about why you're having this emotional reaction. So hysterical defenses are people that get into states, let's say, against understanding and deliberating their choices. Do you see? So those are called oral defenses in Freud, where you know you seek to become dependent on someone or all of that. So I would say for me, this is a great way and a unique way to talk about the responses and reactions of the signs to life. How does an Aries respond? How would they respond in a defensive way? Well, we all know that. You know, how would Pisces respond? You know, by blurring the issue. I know a Mars in Pisces. He's marvelous. And I remember getting this when I was speaking with him as a client. If ever I have my Mars in Virgo, so I don't recommend meeting the other sign, because as much as I wanted to try and define and clarify what a fear or was, he would blur the issues. For example, he might say, well, that's just your opinion, isn't it? It's, you know, it's just one among many opinions, I suppose, you know. Do you see? And you can't argue against it. It was a marvelous defense. Fudge the issue. Well, you know, yeah, you might be right, but I'm not so sure. You know, it's sure, see, or you know, Mars in Scorpio might go all kind of silent but poisonous. I'm not going to tell you anything because I'm impenetrable. Because I'm an impenetrable, because if you get in there, I feel emotionally vulnerable. Scorpio is a peculiar sign that it wants fusion and love. It's so passionate, and yet is so afraid of it because it knows that if it gets it, it might devour them. They become so vulnerable. So they put up they erect defenses against it. It's a bit of a peculiar side. So for me, that's the key. And then she does a marvelous lecture too on Saturn, right, on all the Saturnian defenses such as contempt and denial and avoidance and rigidity. And as I point out, my thesis and her book, it's Saturn that is the key to defenses, because it represents the skin, the barriers that you put up against anxiety, inside or external, and so on. And then she does a marvelous thing on Chiron at the end. I think the whole book is a tour de force of an interweaving of psychology and astrology. It's her at her best, I think. But we've got to remember something, that I think when reading it, you can tell that when she's transcribing, and I think she did all her own transcriptions, she's got quite a lot of license to put in some more stuff in. So when you're transcribing, I do that. So often there is a lot in there. I can't see her saying that, all of that, and remembering all of that in a single paragraph. But that's what you do with transcriptions. You add in and you make it, because verbal exchange is not written language. But somehow these seminars from the Centre for CPA, she finds a way of doing that. So you're actually engaged in the seminar, and there is a sense of discussion and interchange with the audience. And by the way, this is a hardback copy. They're very rare now to get. I spent some time getting them, and they're, I think they're going for about £100 on the market now.
It's interesting that you went straight to the description of the defense mechanisms in the Zodiac and the elements, because that's exactly where I thought, this is good. I mean, obviously the whole of it is good, but that was also the bit that really grabbed me. And of course, Saturn. Some people might be surprised at Saturn being associated with the defense. They might have been thinking about Mars. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting that, again, bringing in my thesis, I also put that high on the agenda. But we have to remember that Mars is a fighting defense, that it kicks back, and that not all defenses are fighting. For example, the air defenses and Uranian defenses are very dissociative. So if you have an Aquarian, Aquarius has a tendency to distance themselves from emotional reactions by understanding them. Gemini has a way of over-verbalizing, or the intellectualization defense that Freud talked about, that people think that when they talk about their feelings, then that's it. You still have to feel them. And most signs have to go through their thing in order to come out to some understanding. Freud himself was Moon in Gemini. We often forget that. So it's called the talking cure, right? And in many ways, Freud's whole edifice of psychoanalysis is a description of the emotional patterns and systems within one. He's just right. In other words, Freud's psychoanalysis is a language of the internal mechanisms of the psyche. It's so pure, Moon in Gemini. It's a defense against his own feelings of vulnerability.
And the thing is that it's so obviously true when I'm working with clients. I always know, if I have a moon in an air sign, that there's going to be a lot of talking and not a lot of feeling. And it's not because they don't have feelings, it's because of that desire to distance from feelings. And so I know it's going to be a lot harder in some respects, because the logic will all be there. Yes. And they can talk for hours about their feelings without actually connecting with them.
Yes. Well, in the words of the great and I call her great, and she was absolutely great. I love her, Mary Louise von Franz, who she was a first generation analyst. She said about depth therapy that the person usually brings in the first instance their best foot forward, their type, so that if you're an intellectual type, let's say Gemini, you're Mercury strong and everything else, you have to work through that first. And then the person realizes that they've talked it all out, but they haven't felt anything. So then comes, if you stay at it, then comes the inferior function of feeling. And the person comes, they don't have anything to say, but they're all over the place. They don't know what to do. Their intellect has stopped giving them clues and everything else. And then along comes the intuition or the work with dreams, which is very watery and fiery. And then this submission to some external agency of meaning, right, which is the self in Jungian work. And then the final, or not necessarily the final, is the earth side. You have to actually now get on and do something practical. Instead of talking about how your place is a mess, get on and learn how to decorate. Now, sometimes it's the other way around. People come in and they go, well, give me the pill, give me the thing. There must be something wrong with me physically. Take this tea. You get many people work on, well, these moods are basically nutritional, which they might be. Fine. So you work through all of the practicalities of working with it, and it still doesn't change anything. Then they might come in with the feeling. And feelings are often defended against understanding because you have to pull away from the feelings. You have to objectify the feelings and go, well, actually, I do feel that, but I'm not going to get so caught up with it today. That's the intellectual, see? And then the fire is, okay, what is this telling me to do? What can I do differently? You know, it's an appreciation of a positive future, very fiery defenses. Let's get something going. So I think you have to work through whatever function is presented to you. And it does not mean to say that moon in air doesn't have any feeling, but they process it through the air sign.
It's
And
the
the dispositor, just to say, the dispositor of where the moon is, where Mercury is if moon is in Gemini, where Saturn is if moon is in Aquarius. See, and where Venus is with the moon the moon in Libra. If that's in Cancer, for example, no, it couldn't be in Cancer. Yeah, the moon in Libra. Yeah, perhaps the Venus is in Cancer. Then you get that mutual reception between feeling and thinking and feeling and thinking. You get it easier. So you have to investigate the chart to see how removed and objective the air signs want to be.
Absolutely. And it is a process, as you say. And I think we have to also understand that the defenses are there for a reason. And
Yes.
we all are vulnerable. And so we have defenses for a reason.
Oh,
Uh,
yes. She
but
makes that point very strongly in the introduction, as you know. We're not
yes,
to see defenses as a problem. They are there. But if you, she also makes the point, I think, somewhere in that, or is it Anna Freud? I think it's, Liz. For me, it depends how much the personality is invested in defending. If almost every planet is defensive, you know, if you've got your moon in Cancer or the sun's in Cancer, and every time somebody rejects your emotional advances, you get all defensive. You crawl into your shell, you become paranoid, you don't want to be touched, and you do want to be touched, and you become hysterical, and you self-defeating and moany, and all of those, you know what I mean? All of that. If every time somebody approaches that, the person has become over defensive. And in other words, the character, as I know in psychotherapy, character defenses, what they call character defense or character armoring, which is where Wilhelm Reich came in, psychoanalysis, that's a different order. That's where the whole character is invested in defending. So in other words, they've become less just ego defenses against different kind of threats, which everybody has, and it's entirely appropriate to that individual, to their life being a defensive armoring against change. And every approach to one's defenses becomes a potential threat. But whereas in fact, it's an invitation to relate differently, but relating differently is a threat because they will have to move or change. You know, the defenses around the ascendant sign are particularly very clear in individuals because that's the first arena which you see. I would call them persona defenses or defenses of identity. So that's the immediate ones, but you have deeper ones like repression. Wherever Pluto is, you don't want to go down to Pluto's realm. So you repress the feelings. Do you see? Or Jupiter wants to just escape. He's the flight defense. If you see Jupiter and Venus get together, well, if a relationship becomes too involved, we can always swap it. We can always change it because the grass is always greener. So I think one has a familiarity with these defenses, the astrological placements immediately become so rich. That's my feeling. And that's what Liz Greene gives in this book, I think.
Absolutely. And so a reminder to everyone that the wonderful book we are discussing is Barriers and Boundaries by Liz Greene. And just to remind you all, here it is. So I just want to say thank you, Richard, for talking about your involvement with this subject and your thesis and the link with the book and indeed the book itself. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, that's okay. I hope we do it again, perhaps with another one, because as you might see, the Center for Psychological Astrology was intrinsically important in my career. The influence of Dr. Liz Greene and House Sportus, an immense difference to my life, and I revere them both. And it's such a shame more of Howard's lectures were not taken down too, because I think he had a more humanistic approach to rather than a more analytic that you get with Liz. But both offer a great understanding of the complexity of human behavior and conduct.
Well, I didn't have the privilege of studying directly with them, but I still consider them to be my teachers.
Oh, yeah.
So, they have had a huge, huge impact on me and on my work, and I owe them both a great debt. So,
don't we both?
Yeah, it's absolutely, and it is one of the reasons why, given the opportunity to do this beautiful series of studies of Liz Greene's books, I thought, yes, let's do it. So thank you again, Richard, for your time today.
It's a pleasure. Nice to see you.
And you. And if people want to find you, how do they do that?
Well, you can either go to the London school or you can pass my telephone number on to them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be talking about astrology and belief. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.